For a majority of HSR's lifespan, it's been seen as one of the best gacha games in the space, even surpassing its predecessor Genshin in terms of quality and generosity in the eyes of many. It really was at the top of the world until...
Mistress is fine, right?
No.
Actually, she's quite...
Ever since Honkai Star Rail confirmed the existence of Castoris's rumored global passive, I've been thinking a lot more than usual, which is crazy, since at the time of writing this, it's barely been a day since the livestream. I've been thinking a lot. This simple revival with a caveat has led me to some places and led me to some harsh truths I've never thought I'd even admit to. I'm making this discussion video, first one in a long time, so people can be more aware of the red flags when other gacha games potentially start to utilize certain practices that may lead to more harm than good. I have 3 main points of discussion, and they will be tackled in that order, since each one feeds into the next. Starting with point 1. First, I don't mean the visual designs, since for the most part I think HSR does these pretty well. What this point is meant to discuss is how HSR's way of designing their characters' gameplay and kits have so much wrong with them, though this mainly pertains to damage-focused characters, as supports generally seem to be designed well, if not a bit too samey. This point was mainly going to go more into the specifics of why supports in this game can be so loaded and not be considered a problem, while damage dealers, when faced with the same situation, are a problem. This topic will still be discussed, but when I thought about it more and more did I see the cracks in HSR as a turn-based game. To elaborate on this, supports in HSR are made to be more unique and balanced around the current roster of characters. Follow-up teams are lacking a dedicated support? They made Robin. HP-based damage dealers exist? Here's Fu Xuan. Dot is losing relevance? Here's Black Swan, and oh shit, Dot is back to being irrelevant. But when it comes to damage dealers, they all just seem to be balanced around the game itself lately, which isn't too bad on paper. The early damage dealers did something right. They functioned the same but with different quirks. Blade was an HP scaling damage unit. Seela focused on building momentum and clearing mobs. Jingliu gave players an option to go hard on crit damage as long as they were able to get ample uptime on her talent. This was fine. And the supports for these units reflected that. What made these units unique and healthy for the game was how their playstyles were different, yet viable. Blade and Kafka weren't busted and fun since they had follow-up attacks that could synergize with Topaz and Robin. This is sarcasm, by the way. They were good units because they invited new ways of playing the game, different ways of tackling content, and it may just so happen that in certain scenarios, one may prove to be better than the other. That promotes team building, which is a core part of any turn-based game. But now we get modern damage dealers. As much as I may love Acheron, she is partially responsible for the rise of HP inflation, cause the devs just had to give her easy access to 1 million damage. But she wasn't enough to really break the game. She was still a new unit that invited a unique style of play. A good choice they did with her kit was how she seemed to be balanced around the roster at the time. She made use of nihility units in a unique way outside of Dot. But Acheron was just the devs dipping their toes into the water, seeing how far they can get with a new unit's damage output. Then came the next Galaxy Ranger, Boot Hill. Another test, but also an introduction to the new Super Break mechanic. He still followed the formula of providing a new gameplay experience, even though this experience involved actively ignoring one of the game's core mechanics that incentivized team building. These two eventually built up the destructive crescendo that was... Firefly. Now, I'll admit, I use Firefly a lot, but that's because for a casual player, Firefly's kit and what made her game-breaking allowed me to not think about the game too much, since I still had a life I had to grind. But the point still stands. She was game-breaking. Ignoring preset weaknesses through weakness implants, thanks Silverwolf, a boatload of damage, and suddenly the game was balanced in her favor. Then we'd get more super break units that make use of actively ignoring one of the game's core systems and being heavily rewarded because of it. HSR has been on a power creep trend since the version 2 updates, where it was a contest to see who could do more damage than the last unit, while adding a tiny detail where this unit is more suited to this endgame mode, so players are more incentivized to pull for the shiny new toy rather than find alternative ways of tackling difficult content. The big elephant in the room. It's been stated to the moon and back that global passives are ultimately detrimental in the sense that not having a certain unit makes your account worse and feeds into the FOMO. The issue isn't with the concept of global passives as much as it is the way of acquiring it. I wouldn't be against global passives if it was something you get for completing Casters' story quest. But to have it locked to the limited gacha is just...
It's so dumb.
It's so dumb, it's brilliant.
No! It's just dumb!
But what's even worse is the community's response. I don't want to force my or others' views onto other people. If you want to live your life and enjoy the game regardless of the existence of global passives, then be my guest. Where the community absolutely f***ed up is in how they're downplaying the situation. Yes, it's only a conditional revive, but just like in the previous point of discussion, but Akron was just the devs dipping their toes into the water, seeing how far they can get with a new unit's damage output. The devs have shown this pattern on multiple occasions now. They'll introduce a new concept, see how far they can get with it, and build upon it to make a new game-breaking unit. They did it with weakness implants, they did it with super break, and I'm surprised they didn't do anything with Sparkle's whole 7SP thing. Sure, on paper, a potential and hypothetical global 5% attack buff isn't much, and won't affect endgame as hard as Akron or Firefly did. But when an obvious plus for all your units, even the ones in desperate need of buffs, is locked behind the limited gacha, that feeds into FOMO. It's common for players to pull for characters that they might not even like if they just so happen to make their favorite character even slightly stronger. And considering Hoyo, where does this stop? It's a conditional revive now, but will they stop at that? Will they stop at a global speed boost? Will they not lock certain effects for global passives behind the Eidolons? Again, if you want to play the game regardless of this, it's all good. But let's not kid ourselves at how much this may or may not affect the game. This is Hoyoverse we're dealing with. They aren't above predatory practices. It just so happens that the HSR dev team does a better job at sugarcoating their practices. The more numbers new units pump out for less effort, the more the game scales to match that. It's a weird Ouroboros-like cycle that leaves older units and concepts like team building in a ditch. HP inflation is rampant in HSR, that's undeniable. Gacha games are prone to this, but what separates the bad from the good is how the game allows you to tackle the issue. Let's use Arknights as an example. Surtur is one of the biggest cases of breaking a game that I had ever seen in all my time playing gacha games. Hell, I'd say she still is the biggest. Patriot was one of the most feared bosses in the game because he was so tanky. So tanky to the point that the most viable way of defeating him was true damage, available to only 2 SR casters. Then came Surtur with her arts damage resistance, ignore, her massive increase in HP, and life after death. Put simply, she was pure burst damage with survivability to boot. Seeing this, the devs created bosses like Emperor's Blade and this flower thing. The former wasn't a tank. What he did was debuff operators' attack speed and force them to retreat. The latter had such a massive HP pool. On paper, this is horrible for the game at large if the game didn't incentivize thinking outside the box. Sure, Emperor's Blade had the force retreat, but it was your job to work around its cooldown and bait it out on expendable units, or have a defender stall him out till your entire team could deal with him alone. And as for Flowey, they had the biggest HP pool we had ever seen for a boss up to that point. If you only decided to just Surtur it, you'd get frustrated when it was easier to eliminate the boss using units that attacked more consistently and took advantage of the boss's low defense to physical damage. Of course, Arknights is no saint and has its own issues, but it, despite being a tower defense game, adhered to concepts you'd expect a game like Star Rail to do. Thoughtful team building, adjusting to the situation, and experimenting with new ideas and combinations. Even FGO of all things can get this right. It's fine to have broken units. It allows people who have them to clear the game more efficiently and at the pace they have more control over than if they didn't. This becomes a problem when the entire game then works around countering said broken unit and at the same time, bringing down a lot of the roster along with it. Instead of having higher HP pools and giving MOC buffs that work primarily in the newly released 5-star's favor, give players more options and unique buffs that can work with their favorite playstyle. Create mechanics that employ the player to experiment with using other units rather than having the mechanic just be break their bar to stop their one-shot move. I like HSR. I like the world and even the gameplay due to its simplicity, allowing me to have a more casual experience. But just because my casual experience isn't ruined, just because MOC is an option and not a must, doesn't mean I can just ignore the direction Star Rail is going. I like characters like Scylla and Blade and would like to have them, but it's not fun knowing that using them will feel more like a chore when compared to using Gundam Aerial. I have and invested a lot. Even an entire team for Kafka, only to have that time and investment be thrown to the wayside since HSR wants to bring in true damage into the game when damage over time can barely do anything when it isn't buffed to hell by Divergent Uni. There's also something to be said about the team's, tactics. Maybe I'm overthinking it. I'm not. But isn't it quite manipulative how they barely tackle Castors' global passive, and how they smother us with free stuff in the hopes that it becomes our topic of discussion? Yeah, call me crazy. I am, but not for this. But Hoyo's really been using some very manipulative practices outside of the game. I wonder what Dawei has to say for this.
有的声音特别的尖锐。 然后把我们整个原神和原神项目组都贬得一无是处。
What's fucking wrong with you, bro? Stop fucking laughing, bro. Look at you smiling.
还有很多人。